if somebody can show up and be their best and they know that that week off is going to help them be the best version of themselves, then whether it's a 9 to 5 or a Starbucks, and as long as there's coverage, like I don't see an issue with it. I mean, I had a conversation with a friend recently about teenagers and like these young girls that get their period, and like there's the parents that like keep their daughter home from school, and then there's the parents that are like, no, you're absolutely going no matter what. I think that probably sets a little bit of a foundation into like what they grow into. Missing school like never even crossed my mind.
Yeah,
right? Like absolutely not. And I don't necessarily want to like create that for my daughter, but then again, it's like if there's data and studies that show like, hey, if she goes a half day or if she rests or whatever it might be, then the next week she's going to do even better and learn even more and absorb even more. Like I'm 100% open-minded to like receiving that information.
All right, Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I am so excited to have you here and be able to chat. I know you and I were just like chit-chatting before, and we we're like, this is what we want to do. We just want to chit-chat and have this conversation and be able to share and talk a little bit. So before we do that, would you mind going ahead and just sharing and introducing yourself a little bit?
Yeah. So I'm Elizabeth, and I help creative leaders build communities so that marketing is easy. So any type of creative business, entrepreneur, artists, I just love working with people that have a little bit of that like messy, creative energy. My podcast is called the Messy Success Podcast. So I'm really into helping the type B people feel like they can survive in a type A world.
So good. And honestly, I was actually talking to a client this morning, and we were talking about this idea of like having things very rigid and structured versus having it very loose and not. And she and I were just chit-chatting, and I was like, I would consider myself probably a type A type of person in the sense of like, I like to get things done. I want to do it well. I push hard and I go hard. At the same time, like if you box me in and try to rigid structure it, like I cannot handle that. Like I want more of the flow. My calendar, I want it to be very loose. If there's something on my calendar, like it has to be. So it's like this balance of, I don't know, maybe I'm a type C person instead of a type A or a type B, because I really like having the like efficiency, getting things done, being organized, but I want it in this very flow, loose, messy-ish sort of way. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm like, I don't know exactly what I am, but I know I am not the extreme type A. But I find there's so much creative like freedom in having some type of structure. So like you said, I will like literally schedule my time block where like nothing is allowed to touch that block. I will do whatever I want during that time. Right. So if it's like, if I have 2 meetings in between, I'm like, I'm not going to schedule anything. That is my time. And I will decide what I want to do. But there's enough like, rigidness to my schedule that I know when those blocks can happen. So yeah, it's absolutely like a mixture of both, but I find that freedom comes with the structure, right? As long as it's not too rigid.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what I like actually had somebody in on my podcast a while back, and she was talking about like her system and her structure. And afterwards I was like, oh my gosh, it kind of makes me cringe. Like I could not do that. Like I could not be that structured. Like today, I know I had a call early in the morning. I had a client call. I have a call with you. I have a call with my clients after, like, so it's like this schedule thing. But tomorrow I know that the whole day is open for me to be able to, work on the projects that I need to get done. And so I tend to fall into more of a structure like that, and know, like, I want that spaciousness in between, like you just said, like, I want this space for me to be able to focus in on whatever I need to focus in on at that time, but don't make me actually like rigid time block. This is when I check my emails. This is when I do my phone calls. This is when I do my whatever. Like, I can't do that. I just can't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. You have to have time to do the deep work. Now, did you schedule tomorrow that way, like intentionally, or did it just kind of happen?
Well, Tuesdays is my day. So I do that Tuesdays. Sometimes I get a little bit fudgy and I end up with a call on there or not. Like, I actually looking at my calendar, I do think I have, is it 2 calls? I do have 2 calls, I think tomorrow morning in the morning. So like sometimes it gets a little fudgy where there's other things that land on that Tuesday, but normally my Tuesdays are my day that I try to not schedule anything. And so that you said, I can get into that deep work. I can get those big projects done. anytime I'm switching gears from like a podcast like this, like I had 30 minutes between the call that I had now and the call with you. And I spent the entire time really figuring out my technology and didn't get anything done. And so you just get into those modes where it's like you lose the time, right? Like
Yes.
versus having a full day where I just have this full day. I can do whatever I need to get done. And it works so much better for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, are you a work all day kind of person? Like, do you go all the way to 5 p.m. or do you have a shorter work day?
I have a much shorter work day because I have kids. So I tend to not start working until 9. And I want to hear your story too. I don't start working until 9 and I'm usually done by 2 or 2:30. So I have a very short workday day and I only do that Mondays and Tuesdays.
Yeah.
And then on Thursdays, my kids are uber short school day. And so I work from 9 to 12. Sometimes that's not even a day I work at all. So really, it's Mondays and Tuesdays from like 9 to 2. And then sometimes, like when I have a big launch or something like yesterday, I worked most of the day, kind of getting stuff together and whatnot for launching and things. But for the most part, it's Mondays and Tuesdays. So one day is like focused on clients, calls, podcasts, whatever. Then Tuesday is my like deep work day.
Yeah. No, mine's
How
very,
about
very
you?
similar. I start about 8:30 and I end about 2:30 because I love being able to get my girls off the bus. And I found if I schedule anything later than that, it's like I just don't enjoy it. Now I have a couple of like standing meetings or like West Coast people, like there are exceptions,
Yeah.
to the rule. But yeah, I find my brain likes to be done by about 2:30.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, so even if I have the opportunity to work longer, I'm like, but I'm kind of
Mhm.
done.
Well, that goes into like just our biology, right? Like we're not made to sit and stare at a computer all day long. We're not made to like as human beings, they like talk about the sitting disease, like people aren't made to just sit and stare at a computer all day. And so we think that more time actually makes us more effective, but sometimes it's the smaller chunks of time that are more focused than having the longer breaks of spaciousness afterwards that really helps us actually work at our best.
Yeah. And I definitely like my brain, I feel like is the best from that like 9 to 12. Like 9 to 12, I can get
Mhm.
anything done in the world. And then it's like starts to kind of taper off a little bit. But
Yes.
I love listening to this stuff. I hope everyone like kind of likes the little behind the scenes, right? Like
Yeah.
let's normalize these shorter work days.
Yes, for sure. And actually, one of the things I teach my clients is to track those like rhythms throughout the day. So we work in like 90-minute zones. And for me, that is my highest peak zone is like that 9 to 12. Or sometimes, like if I'm in my accelerate and connect phase when I'm feeling like super pumped on estrogen, I will get up before my kids get up and I will work. So like this morning, I had a VIP call for my clients at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And so from 6 to 7, I'll work. And if I can get work done early like that in the day, then you just feel like you're on high all day. So it's like I work for an hour, then I come do the kids, whatever. It's like, then I come back and then I'm ready to go again. And it's such a great like boost one of just like feeling like you have so much done already, but then also you're working in those zones of like your energy's rising like in the mornings and things like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
love
I
it. Love
can't
it.
wait to get to that point of predictability because I do have some mornings where I'm like ready to go.
Yeah.
And since our podcast where you kind of helped me with the cycle track, I've been starting to put it into my schedule. So I'm really excited to get to that point of predictability. I'm like, this is the morning that I can get up.
Yes, it makes such a huge difference. Like when we start to just see where our bodies are at and how that feels. Now, okay, this is a whole nother topic. And I actually was
Yeah.
going to record a podcast. I was trying to do that in that 30 minutes before our call and recording a podcast on my own around a post that I've had on social media recently that I think I was running some ads, like engagement ads to it because it was doing really well and getting people into my launch that I was just doing. The whole theme of it was around women that they don't need to work the week of their period.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in that, it got into this vortex of men. And now the only people really commenting it on it are men. And this idea that we have to work all day, like all the time. And that the reason that women or like the reason that there's a wage gap for women is because we're asking for this week off, right? So now I'm just kind of curious because was a conversation in a podcast episode I'm going to record that now you and I talking about this, like knowing that we work best from like 9 to 2 or 9 to 12 and that our work days are 9 to 2 and I only work 2 days a week or whatever. How do you feel like this fits in with the new narrative of how women work and not just women, but like work, like what we've normalized as working in general?
Yeah. And I don't even think this is like a woman man thing. This is like a
No.
9 to 5 thing, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
the productivity and whether we're getting our responsibilities done should really be the only measuring stick. And as women, if we could take off that week or modify, like it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? But what if that we only work remote or we only take meetings during a certain window? And our stuff is getting done and we're working at like our highest level of good or in our power or zone, like that's all that should really matter, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not about like, oh, let's not get paid for that week. No, if the productivity is there, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now I'm curious because I mean, for you and I, this makes sense, right? Like as
Right.
an entrepreneur and somebody that runs our own business and stuff like that. Like, but I know for like my dad, who is an entrepreneur and he's has tons of employees, like he wants to pay people for their time, right? So I think there's probably different industries and different spaces where it's like a job done versus like a pay by hour type of mentality. Like there's two different kind of roles. I mean, I just am kind of curious, like, somebody working at Starbucks, like we need somebody there at Starbucks all the time. Like
Right.
it's not like a job done or job not done. So I don't know if like that, I see that even too, like in the next generation of these new young kids growing up and like the way they approach work and things like that. Like I'm just kind of curious. Like, this is not what we
Yeah.
had talking about, but just like how the viewpoint that we have on work and efficiency and productivity is going to shape the way we show up and also where the next generation goes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it kind of boils down to leadership, right? Like if
Mhm.
somebody can show up and be their best and they know that that week off is going to help them be the best version of themselves, then whether it's a 9 to 5 or a Starbucks, and as long as there's coverage, like I don't see an issue with it. I mean, I had a conversation with a friend recently about teenagers and like these young girls that get their period and like there's the parents that like keep their daughter home from school and then there's the parents that are like no, you're absolutely going no matter what, and
Yeah.
I think that probably sets a little bit of a foundation into like what they grow into. Missing school like never even crossed my mind,
Yeah.
right? Like
No.
absolutely not. And I don't necessarily want to like create that for my daughter, but then again, it's like if there's data and studies that show like, hey, if she goes a half day or if she rests or whatever it might be, then the next week she's going to do even better and learn even more and absorb even more. Like I'm 100% open-minded to like receiving that information. And also
Mhm.
like our cycles are so different. Like I didn't
Mhm.
have a lot of pain. I didn't have a lot of
Yeah.
symptoms.
Yeah.
All my symptoms are like happening as a 40-year-old, but like when I was a teenager, I felt nothing. Like it was
Yeah.
no different to me. So I think that's a really important piece too. And that's why I say it boils down to leadership because I
Mhm.
could see a lot of women in society taking it to the extreme of like, ooh, this
Mhm.
is an excuse for a week off.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
that's where I think it gets a little bit gray. But if we focus
Mhm.
on everybody being like great leaders where they're going to make the best decisions for themselves, then I think there's a world where it could work.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think you are correct because like I tend to not have like really extreme periods. Like there's some days where I'm like, I notice it in my
Mm,
energy, not necessarily in pain or discomfort or things like that. One, that's a whole nother conversation that like I think our society as a whole has normalized really painful periods and really excruciating symptoms and just like, oh, this is just the way it is. And like birth control is our only option for that. Like that's a whole nother conversation to have. But it's like, I love that you brought in the idea of leadership because I think it is this conversation of how do we lead? And even, recently I was talking to a client, and she was asking me about, like if I like the difference between working out because I want to work out or working out because I know that this is the best way to support my body in the hormones that I'm at. And that some days we're not going to feel it. Right. So I think
mm,
no matter where we are in our cycle, there's an element of like where our hormones are at and what our body's doing, but also this element of like the leadership and like being committed and staying in integrity with what we've committed to and acting as the version of us that we want to become and not necessarily like this instant gratification of where we are right now today. And I think that maybe is the bigger conversation, but I would, like your feedback on that of like where that line falls, like how do we differentiate between today, right? Like the instant gratification of like, this is what my body feels like versus, when we want to move towards goals, sometimes it's not always comfortable. Sometimes it's not always this place of just like, oh, I'm just riding through life and it feels easy and it feels flowy. Like there's moments that are uncomfortable and moments that stretch us and moments that make us lean into places that we didn't necessarily want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, people like you and I, and probably a lot of the listeners too, are such a good example of like how this can work and how we are going to lean into that leader, that best version of ourselves. Because, like, if someone was to give you a free pass, here, Renee, your period's here, take an entire week off, you're not going to be like, oh, yes. Like, you're going to be like, no, like, I might like go rest for an hour, or my exercise might look different, or my workday might look different, but like, I'm not going to take off. Like I'm so committed to what I want to do,
Yeah.
So I think when there's people like us who are doing something that we love and we want to show up for our work every single day, it's like, we're not even going to accept that free pass,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's really knowing, is that person going to accept that as a free pass, or is that just going to support and enable them to make the best decisions for them in that moment?
Yes. Yeah. And I think that like it does bring into like for you and I both, like we have a vision of what we want to create. We know where we're going and what we're doing. It's like we're here to make an impact. Like I love to work. Like
Yeah.
I love to sit down and create things and do things. It's not me just trying to get a easy pass. Like it's me
Yeah.
knowing and honoring exactly where my body's at. And I think that is the biggest difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And not taking advantage of it. Like, let's not take advantage of the fact that our body feels slower, our body feels that. But okay, what is my body telling me? And what do I need to do to optimize its performance?
So good.
Crazy,
So
right?
good.
And I love that
So
you used exercise as an example, because there are plenty of days where it's like we don't feel like it. But those of us that are really committed to our physical health, it's like you do it anyway.
yeah.
I'm always like, if I can just get the clothes on and like start walking, it will trigger me to like want to do the full on exercise. And if
Yeah.
not, a walk is great too. It's like body movement. Like the days I'm not
Yeah.
feeling it, I'm like, Liz, you don't have to like train for a marathon today. You don't have to lift the most weights today. It's body movement, right? Like that's it.
Yep. Yep. And that's where I think that for me, I really think that women need to really readjust like how we're setting goals, because most of what we've been taught to set goals is based on more of that masculine, sort of strategy of like, I'm going to work out 30 minutes every single day and I'm going to do this workout plan and I'm going to do it like, and I'm going to stay committed to it. And then there are some days where all of us, men and women, are just not going to want to do it. I think it's just learning and understanding where's that line of like, this is what my body is needing versus this is what my ego or my head is calling. And like, this is what I want. Right. And so for me, I do like set intentions. Like I will move my body every single day, but what that looks like and how that looks is totally different. There are some days that it's bright and early, first thing in the morning. There are some days, and well, most days I would say it's probably like in that 3 to 4 o'clock range when I like right after I pick up the kids from school, they get home, they're like vegging and I'm like, cool, this is give me 30 minutes. I've got this in and out. And then other days it's literally a 9 o'clock at night walk around the block. Like, but I make the commitment that there's going to be some sort of element of movement, the expectation of what that looks like, the pressure of it needing to be or have a certain way or to push my body beyond. But then the opposite of that is true. Like this last week, I don't remember, but my body was just like, I'm so stiff. I'm so tired. I can't remember if I was like working on something or something. It was just like a low vibe day. But I knew based on where I'm at in my cycle that if I got up and did a workout, I would feel so much better. Like I knew it wasn't just about the like where my body feels right now, but it's like, how is it going to feel after? And at that point too. And it's like knowing that supporting myself where I am at my cycle, where I'm at in my body, like me going and doing the workout, even though I didn't feel like it in the moment, was going to then have benefits in the end. And I was more willing for the benefits than the trade-off of like not wanting to get my shoes on and do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you brought in the ego, because I'm like thinking about it like, okay, if our body was just like this thing and we took our mind out of it completely, like a plant, you just have to like water it. Like our physical body would never ever say, don't walk today and don't go out in the sun today. Like, don't drink any water today. Like our body would never do that. Like it just wants the things that it wants to optimize its health. And it's our brain that's like, I don't feel like walking today. Right. Like that's totally our brain. Our body is saying, please walk, please walk, please walk.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No,
It's
for sure.
so interesting to think about like separating the ego from the physical body in that way, because it's so true.
Yeah. And I think that honestly, like that is something that I feel like I have done over the years. And I can't say that I'm always like the greatest at it, right? Like I think it's this evolution. Sometimes for me, like when I'm working with somebody else and they say that, they say, like, how do I know if it's my body or if it's my ego? For me, it's kind of like, well, you just know. But I think it is a learned thing that I've learned over the time. I don't know if for you, if you feel like you wrestle with that, like that idea, or like what is it? For me, I think it is the vision of knowing where I want to go and who I want to be. I think is a big defining factor of like determining, is this an instant gratification thing and this isn't a body thing? But I would love kind of your take on that. Like, what do you feel like it has been for you to help kind of like distinguish that? Like, this is me trusting my intuition and trusting my body, or this is me listening to my ego. Like, how do you differentiate those?
Well, I think you nailed it when you kind of talked about like the future, right? The future version of ourselves. Like I always think about, if I'm feeling stuck or I'm having negative thoughts, it's like, what is going to feed the future that I want, right? Like what is going to water that seed or whatever. Whereas the ego is typically, like you said, it's very circumstantial. It's very right now. I don't feel like doing this today, but I always say, well, what would the tomorrow version of you like want to look back and say, right?
Yeah.
And there is this balance because I think the people who tend to over indulge, like they're extremes on the opposite side, like the people who get obsessive compulsive workout tendencies, it's like, okay, you need a day of rest. Like your body is going to tell you to slow down. But I already know very, very well, like my thresholds when it comes to exercise. So like 9 out of 10 times, it's like, no, Liz, you need to go work out, not you need to slow down. Right.
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
slow day is like 30 minutes walking. That's still a rest day. That's still
Yeah.
resting. Right. Like we convince ourselves that the rest is like a day on the couch or whatever. Like that's the ego, right? The body does not want that. So really, it's just all about that future. What does a future version of me want to see? What's going to help me create that? And I think that's the best way to separate the mind,
Yeah.
from the ego or the heart from the ego.
Yeah, it's like it is a gut heart response versus a head response. Like if you can think your way through it or rationalize it with like all the thoughts versus like if you truly just listen to the body. Like I think that's the other part is that we've been taught in society to disconnect from the body and to think so like so many of us are just so up in the head, like so in the head that we don't even notice like what our body's doing and we don't notice the symptoms our body's giving us and we don't notice like our intuition. Like we don't even pay attention to that because whether it be society or what, but we've been so focused on the thinking brain and the logical brain and the strategy and the systems and the tools and the like what makes sense all the time. And sometimes what makes sense isn't necessarily what we need.
Yeah. Yeah. My health journey really kicked off this year after like a decade of having babies and like not putting myself first at all, and I think about like what is different now that I like exercise probably 5 days a week, like super regularly since about March. But I was very unhealthy before that. Like I would have these little like bursts of like, I'm going to exercise, but it would always like die off. Always. I would fall off the wagon or however you want to put it. And I'm trying to think about back to like what made me feel so stuck. It was an afterthought. Like now I know I go to the gym Mondays and Wednesdays at 5, and then I'm going to exercise most likely Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or something in that range. But Mondays and Wednesdays at 5, it's in my calendar. Like it's a commitment. There's no backing out. There's no changing it. Whereas back then it would be like, well, if I get to it today, right? And that's kind of like a dagger to that. It's like, well, if I get to it today. And it was always that. So of course I never did, because then the ego would talk myself out of it like every single day. And there's just something that flips when that thing becomes just as important as going to the grocery store, just as important as getting my kids off the bus, just as important as fixing their breakfast. Like it is in that list of like will do's, not might do's.
For sure. For sure. It's funny. It's like you said, going to the grocery store. That's actually the thing that got dropped from my list.
I love it.
I'm like working out and like these other things is like way more important for me than going to the grocery store. And so 99% of the time I'm just ordering my groceries and they're like just here and I just order them and it's probably costing me more in the long run or whatever. I don't care. It's like, that's not a priority for me. And it was kind of really reevaluating like where I was spending my time. What were the things that were costing me? Is like going to the grocery store doesn't matter how much groceries you need to get. There's no way that you're like getting to the grocery store, buying your groceries and getting home in probably less than an hour. Like,
Right.
so an hour's worth of my time is worth more than me paying an extra $10 or $20 for the
100%.
delivery guy to bring it to my door. And so it's kind of when we stop and kind of frame those thinking and like look at where we're spending our time and look at that and really make a big difference. And so I want to segue this into a little bit about what you do, because I think this is a conversation I heard recently, and I hear it a lot, is especially like new business owners, like new entrepreneurs. And I will say I'm hands down, I was so guilty of this, is when I'm talking to them and they're talking about like first kind of steps in their business, or they have a vision, they have something that they want to go, they know what they want to create. And I ask them, I'm like, okay, well, what are those first steps that you feel like you need to do in order to make that happen? It oftentimes comes in lines of, well, I think I just need to post on social media.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to put something out there. Right. And I posted on social media for probably like 5 years without making much money at all. Like,
true. Yeah, it's true.
You know, I've spent so much time and energy on this thing that didn't really pay me back in the end in the way I was using it. So it wasn't the actual posting on social media that made the big difference for me. Like that doesn't do it. That's not the problem solver. Like I think we oftentimes see that. We see so many big names, or even not big names, but we see so many people posting on social media. And we just assume that on the back end that they're making money and that that's the step that you need to take. It's just all about getting visible. It's just about getting in front of people. And there's so much more to it. And there's so much more nuance to that. But I know that you are in the same vein of let's be smart, let's be effective, let's slow down. Like let's use our time wisely and not be like me, the Renees of the world that spent 5 years posting on social media before you actually even make any money. So tell me a little bit about your strategy, because I know you mentioned it and we've talked a little bit about it. I'd love to hear more.
I mean, yes, gosh, social media is such a thing, but it's all in the messaging. Like, it doesn't matter where you show up. I'm never going to be like, you have to use Instagram or you have to use this. Like, my marketing kind of system is around having a Facebook community and an email newsletter and using those together to really build a community and serve your audience without having to fight some of those algorithms. I mean, Instagram experts will tell you that only 2% of your audience is seeing your stuff. And then in Facebook groups, it's like 40 to 60%. You pair that with an email newsletter, and now your email newsletter, open rate is almost at 40%. And to me, it's like, I just don't really want to like fight those battles. Like, you don't have to brand your stuff in Facebook groups. You don't have to create all this like song and like dance type of entertainment. Now I use Instagram kind of like, this is how people find me, and then like kind of filter them into second base, which is kind of what I consider my Facebook group. So Instagram, all these like first base, social media things are still important. But like, if I don't get to my Instagram post like today or tomorrow or whatever, it's like you said, that's not necessarily what's paying my bills. Mm-hmm. It's helping build my machine. But I show up for my newsletter list every single week. I show up for my Facebook group every single week. I give them value. I ask them questions. I make them feel seen, heard, and important. And like, that's where the magic is. That's how you build community around whatever your mission might be. But any social platform will work, but it's all in the messaging and how we make them feel, not just like showing up for the sake of showing up.
Yeah. Okay. And I love this. And I know, I will admit, I had a Facebook group at one point that had like 5,000 people in it, and it felt exhausting. Like it felt like so much work to keep that group going. Like for the amount of effort I put into it to keep people engaged and to keep people talking and to create that community. Like when I would do a launch or an event, it was great for that period of time. And then the in-between phases, partly parts like me and how I work, like I couldn't keep up that amount of emphasis and effort all the time. And it felt like it took so much of me. And I know that's not how your strategy works. So I would love to kind of like hear, your tools and things like, cause like, yes, what you just said, like having the first base, Instagram or wherever into the Facebook group, but you have to cultivate that community. Like you can't just like pop people in a Facebook group and expect them to all jump up and joy. Like I'm sure I have a bajillion Facebook groups that I didn't even know I'm still part of because they don't show up and I don't see them, right? The algorithm there. So like there is some algorithm pieces to the Facebook group. Mm-hmm. So how do you do that in a sustainable way? Like how are you using it?
Yeah. So I only post like 3 to 5 times a week. And I really focus on like conversation starters, which are like, one line or less, just asking a simple question that gets them talking. So like if I were to share with them about this podcast, I wouldn't be like, hey guys, go listen to my podcast with Renee. Here's what we talk about, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, and then like a branded image. Like that stuff does not perform well in a Facebook group. But I might say like, how many hours a day do you work? Right. And something that is very quick and easy for them to answer. And they're going to be like 4, 8, 16. Oh my God, I need to work less. Or they're going to have something to say. Right. And if they're like, oh, I love this topic, or someone's like, oh, I work 8, but I'd really like to work 6. That's when I would go in to the comments and just say, oh, cool. Like you could listen to this episode that I just did with Renee.
So good.
But that's really it. I mean, it's all about like asking those little questions. And then I teach my students like, one piece of value per week is plenty. Like we have this vision that Facebook groups are supposed to be like hopping and busy and people are supposed to be posting all the time. Like I can have one of my like lowest weeks where I'm barely in there at all. And like my engagement is still 3 times more than 3x what Instagram is. Right.
Yeah.
And then I just use my newsletter to like really build on that. So in my newsletter, I'll say, hey, you guys, like Renee asked this really great question this week about blah, blah, blah. Go check it out. And then I'll see the clicks on the emails and then the engagement go up in the group. Or, hey, we're doing a thread about podcasts. Come tell us if you have a podcast. So I'm using that newsletter to point back to the Facebook group. And that I really focus on like evergreen content in my Facebook group. Like you could go join today. And then eventually you'll get tagged in a welcome post that's like, hey, if you want a quick win, here's all my videos, right? And all the videos have a little thumbnail, like a YouTube channel. So it's easy to find what you want to learn about. And it's evergreen. I will refresh posts from 2021 by just commenting at the bottom or like bumping it to the top. Like I don't reinvent the wheel. I just kind of like show up and hang out. And sometimes they ask questions, but I didn't really create a group. Like there's certain niches that really lend themselves to like members just constantly in there. Anything in the coaching space, you're not going to see that. Like the coaching space, they're going to kind of sit back. They want a quick win. They want to be seen. They want to be heard, but they're not going to be in there like every single day. So I just don't think of it like that. Like it's not a measurement of my success into like how the group looks or feels or acts.
Even the strategy of just like using conversations like questions and saying like, how much do you work? That strategy works on any platform. That's not just a Facebook group.
Yeah.
And so I was like, man, what you're talking about is universal. So like if somebody's listening and does not have a Facebook group, like don't necessarily listen to us and be like, oh my gosh, I have to go get a Facebook group in order to implement Elizabeth's strategies. Like your whole thing is on community and how do you foster community? And while Facebook group is your zone that you really help people do that with, I think anybody could take your stuff and apply it to Instagram or whatever, because it's like, it's universal things. Like we want community.
Yes.
Regardless of what platform we're on. However, you did say something about like commenting on a post from long ago and bumping it to the top. That is not something that you can do on Instagram.
No.
Or
you can like, I just shared one yesterday from like a couple of years ago that like, a couple of my posts on Instagram that perform really, really well. Like occasionally I will reshare them to my stories, but that's still like, it doesn't stay there, right? Like it doesn't stay there. Whereas your Facebook group, a good post will stay at the top for a long time.
Yeah. That's really good. Like I'd never really thought about that. So now this is a little bit selfish of me. I'm just going to ask the question.
Yeah,
asking it later. But the thought on that, like, so I was in the space of like, I don't want a big Facebook group again like that. And I had used my community for my clients off of Facebook. I was using a different platform and then it just died. It fizzled. Like it was just not the greatest. So I've recently moved it back to Facebook. So it's a community for anybody in my world, like anybody that's bought something from me, whether it's a $7 thing or whether it's like a $3,000 thing, they all get access to this one community. And I'm like calling it the cycle circle. So it's like all around cycling, anything, like they all get in there. So in some sense, it's like, it's still a free community in a sense that it's like, it doesn't matter who or what area of the spectrum. It's not program specific, I guess is a better way to put it. It's not program specific, but it's almost like it's gated to get in there. Like
smart.
Not everybody can just get into the circle, whether you bought my cycle guide or you bought your cycle 101, or if you've done anything, you could have access to it. So I'm just kind of curious, like how you would see that playing out differently, because it wouldn't be something I could just directly point people back to.
Yeah. No,
And
I think that's really genius. And then, I mean, if you wanted to use an email newsletter with that group, you could just segment your list based on anybody who's ever bought something, right? And
yeah.
that way you could email them and say, hey, like, guess what's happening in the Cycle Circle this week? And you're just like creating a little bit more of a gated way to nurture these people and to like extend the lifetime value of those customers. Because then now when you do launch something, you can share about it in the group, and you either have people who already bought it that are going to rave about it, which is awesome, or people who haven't seen it that are going to see all this like happening. So I love groups that incorporate their like paid community with either free, or like you said, maybe they've only bought like a $7 item. My signature course, I do not have a specific community for that course. I just like have them in my free group with everybody else, because I'm like, I want them in there to kind of like, you know, be my advocates for the program. So there's so many different ways to do that. But if you have one of those like niches that blows up, like I don't want a 5,000 group either. Like I tell people there's a sweet spot from like 150 to like 750 that is like your views, everything is going to be so good. Your conversion rates, everything's going to be so good. You're creating the group so that people are raising their hand. Like, I want to be in here, you know, versus some of these really big groups. You get people that are just like a little bit curious for a second. But, you know, I'm all about the small groups for sure. I would rather have 5 small groups that I'm managing because I'm really intentional about what they're about than like one huge group that's kind of just like wild, wild west.
Yeah, that's good too, because I think there is like in the industry such an emphasis on like growth and like bigger and get bigger and bigger. And I actually had a friend of mine recently say the same thing, that she felt like the sweet spot for Instagram followers is like 10,000 to 30,000 or something like that. Like once you go above that, like we glorify it, right? We see people with big old numbers and we're like, oh my gosh, that's so great. Like, how could I get there? But it is all about engagement in the community. And that sometimes we put so much emphasis on these big numbers of like how big the email list is and how big the followers group is and how big the Facebook group is, and like all the different things, that those things are not the things that really matter.
No, they don't. I mean, and it's like, sure, they can help you if you want like paid partnerships and stuff like that. But like at the end of the day, you're going to find, I mean, I have a relatively small audience in comparison to like a 5,000 person group, but I have like actual companies that still want to partner with me because of my core values, because of what I do, right? Like I'm their ideal customer in so many ways. It doesn't mean that like you have to have a huge audience. Like there's so many, I know so many millionaires that have like 500 followers on Instagram.
I know.
Like, let's be real.
When I see like the inside like debriefs of some people's, you know, businesses, and like I talk to them or collaborate with them or whatever, and I hear like what they're doing, and then I'm like, you literally have 500 followers on Instagram. Like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you know, you're like, it just blows your mind. Like people oftentimes think that there's this like idea that you have to have this big following, you have to do this big thing, or we put so much, I don't know, we put business in so many different boxes of like what success really looks like and what success means. And oftentimes it's not that. Like those are all just glory numbers.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, this is not coming from a fear of success place, but it's like, think about all the problems also that you have to deal with, right? When you blow up to that extent. I mean, just having freaking security at your events, right? Like everything comes to like a whole nother like level. And I tell myself all the time, like, I am perfectly happy serving a few people. Like all I care about is making a difference. And of course, I want to help as many people as possible. But when I really think about like, what does that version of success look like for me? I don't necessarily see this like big stage and like all these people hooting and hollering, but like I see the artists that I help them like land their biggest gig yet, you know, like when we get clear on that, it's like we can really get clear on like manifesting the results that we want.
So good. So good. Oh, we could probably could just keep talking forever. I love it. It's like tea time, like tea time. Like, I have my little cup of tea. I don't know. What's my quote for today? It says, no person has the right to rain on your dreams.
You have tea bags with quotes?
Yes.
Oh my God. You'll have to send those to me. How fun.
Good Earth. They're really good. I like the sweet and spicy tea. But yeah, it says no person.
It's the Good Earth brand. Can you just buy that at stores?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I bought a big old thing of it at Costco because they really liked it.
Oh, cool. Okay. I'll have to look. I don't know why. I'm like, that just made me really excited. Think about so you can Instagram your little quote every day.
I've never thought about putting it on Instagram, but I probably should. No one has the right to rain on your dreams today. Elizabeth, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? Maybe a Facebook group.
I love it. Yeah. So if you guys are interested in Facebook groups, I have a group all about groups. It's called the Community Builder. You can just go to Facebook and search the Community Builder on Facebook. Everywhere else, I'm just Elizabeth.Henson. And then, oh yeah, I mentioned my podcast. Renee was just on pretty recently. That was a really good episode. And that's the Messy Success Podcast.
So good. So good. Anything you feel like we left out that you want to make sure we leave people with today, or you feel good?
I feel good. I think just really encouraging everyone to tie all of this together, to really lean into how do you create the best version of yourself, and what does that schedule look like? And not just the schedule, but like the way you show up in the world. What does that look like for you on social media, right? Like when I think about Facebook group like draining you, it's probably because you hadn't learned like, how does Renee show up to be the best version of herself yet? Because that weight, I don't know if it's like the ego, but it comes from somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Like you were feeling this pressure to do or be something that didn't feel in alignment. And I think the more that we can tune into our body, like we talked about, and feeding the future that we want, then we can make decisions that best serve the way that we show up in the world.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. If you are listening to this episode, definitely go over to Elizabeth's group and give a little shout out. Let her know that you're there and where you kind of tuned in from. And I know both of us love hearing takeaways. So definitely snap a screenshot and share it, or tag us or send us a message on DMs or like wherever. We would love to hear what you're walking away from this episode with. And Elizabeth, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Alrighty, friend. It was such a pleasure to hang out with you today on today's episode. I cannot wait to do it again with you next week, so save the date. We'll meet here again. Until then, if you haven't already, be sure to leave a review on the podcast, letting us know what you love about this podcast. After you do that, submit a screenshot of that to support@reneefick.com, and you will be entered in to be able to have one of our free spots inside of your Cycle 101, our foundational program, letting you know the ins and the outs of how your cycle impacts you every single day. Alrighty, friend, I will see you next week.